Good evening. This is the April 1st monthly meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. It is now called to order. My name is Mimi Love. I am the chair of the commission, and I'd like to thank the commissioners for donating their time, sharing their valuable insights, and shaping the city of Boston into a more beautiful, sustainable, and equitable place for all its citizens. The planning department continues to host public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. The open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Please note an audio recording of this meeting will be made available to the public. Commissioners with us today, I'm going to do a roll call, and please say present as I call your name. Diana Fernandez.
Present.
Shauna Gillis-Smith.
Present.
I don't know if we have David Hassin with us this evening. We'll come back to him. Mick Young Kim.
Present.
Anne-Marie Lubenow.
Present.
David Manfredi.
Present.
I don't see Catherine Morris. We'll continue with Bill Ron.
Present.
Laura Solano.
Present.
Kirk Sykes.
Present.
And myself, Mimi Love. So we have a quorum.
And Commissioner Love, I do see David, Commissioner Hassin has joined. I just think we need to elevate him.
Great. As you elevate him, I'm going to continue. We'll be approving the March full committee and subcommittee meetings at the next full commission meeting. So with that, we can move on to the report from the Planning Department's review committee on the two projects that we will be seeing tonight.
Thank you, and good evening, Commissioners. For the regulations of Article 28 of the Boston Zoning Code, Planning Department staff have prepared the following recommendations for your consideration. And because we have commissioners recused from both projects, we'll take the votes separately. First, a proposed project at 75 Morrissey Boulevard, Dorchester, also known as 35 to 75 Morrissey Boulevard Phase 1, seeking Article 80B entitlement, contemplates the development of approximately 645,000 square feet of primarily residential uses, 24,000 square feet of open space, and 414 off-street parking spaces in two buildings on an approximately 2.25 acre site, consistent with an approved PDA master plan. The proponent filed a PNF on February 8, 2025, and Planning Department staff hosted a public meeting on March 26, 2025. Planning Department staff recommend that the Commission vote to review the proposed project.
All right, and I believe we have Commissioner Hassin and Commissioner Morris, I think, has joined the call as well, and you may need to elevate her. I'm going to call on commissioners to say yay or nay to review this project. Shauna Gillis-Smith.
Yay.
David Hassin. David.
You must be on mute.
He looks frozen. We'll come back to David in a minute. Mick Young Kim.
Yes.
Anne-Marie Lubenow.
Yes.
David Manfredi.
Yes.
Catherine Morris.
Yes.
Bill Ron.
Yes.
Laura Solano.
Yes.
Kirk Sykes.
Yes.
And yes, for me, Mimi Love. David Hassin, are you? I think he left and will possibly rejoin. Maybe Christina will move on to the next project to review tonight.
The second project is located at 250 Bay State Road, Fenway, also known as the Boston University Pardee School of Global Studies, seeking Article 80B entitlement, which contemplates the development of approximately 70,000 square feet of primarily academic uses and 50,000 square feet of open space in a single 12-story building on an approximately 1.3 acre site, consistent with an approved institutional master plan. The proponent filed a PNF on February 12, 2025. Planning Department staff hosted a public meeting on February 26, 2025. Planning Department staff recommend that the Commission vote to review the proposed project.
Commissioners, I need a yay or nay to review this project. Shauna Gillis-Smith. Shauna,
Yay.
I don't know, David Haseen. Don't see him. Mick Young Kim.
Yes. Yay.
Anne Marie Lubenow.
Yes.
David Manfredi.
Yay.
Catherine Morris.
Yes.
Bill Ron.
I'm recused.
Thank you, Bill. Laura Solano.
I'm recused.
Thank you, Laura. Kirk Sykes.
Yes.
And me, yay. Um,
Can you hear me
Shauna, you're
now?
having trouble with your audio?
Yeah.
Oh, we can hear you.
You can hear me now?
us? Yes.
Okay, good. I don't know what happened then.
And I believe David Haseen is joining us. All right, some audio glitches tonight, but we will muster through it.
I apologize. I'm on.
Thanks, David. No problem. I think with that, Christina, we have agreed to review both projects this evening. So maybe we'll move on to the presentation for review and public testimony of the first project, 3575 Morrissey Boulevard, which came to us back, I believe, in December of 23 as a PDA master plan. And so now we're going to see phase one.
So we're happy to hand this over to Ted and Seth, who will deliver planning context, followed by a brief presentation from the proponent, followed by some summary comments from Seth before deliberations. So Lizzie, if you'll advance slides, and Seth and Ted, take it away.
Thank you, commissioners, and thank you, Christina. So the site is located in the Columbia Point neighborhood of Dorchester between Morrissey Boulevard and I-93, just north of the redevelopment of the old Globe headquarters at South Line and south of the Star Market. The site is currently occupied by a vacant one-story office studio building. It has close proximity to transit at both the JFK UMass Red Line and commuter rail station to the north, as well as the Savin Hill Red Line station to the south. Across I-93 and the rail lies predominantly residential triple-decker fabric of this section of Dorchester. And the east side of I-93 lies contains mostly auto-oriented commercial and institutional development with large expanses of surface parking undergoing a gradual process of densification. And Ted will speak a little bit about the planning history and planning context in a second. At the southern edge of the site lies the South Line Lab office complex, and recently reviewed and approved projects by the Commission of 135 Morrissey Lab office building at the southern edge of South Line, and the mixed-use master plan for Dorchester Bay City across Morrissey Boulevard. Between the site and the JFK UMass station lies the Hub 25 residential development, completed in 2016, consisting of two buildings that flank a central driveway key to district connectivity that Ted will speak to. Next slide, please, and Ted.
Thank you, Seth. So on this slide, the top of the page is oriented to the west, and north is on the right side. The two projects that you'll be reviewing tonight are part of the master plan PDA. Building A is a residential proposal. When this was before you as a PDA master plan, that was envisioned as a lab building. And then building B, which is immediately adjacent to Morrissey Boulevard, was envisioned as a residential building at the time. Next slide, please. So now we flip the orientation. North is at the top of the page. And I wanted to review for the commissioners the Columbia Point Master Plan from 2011, which informed the PDA master plan that you saw before. And starting with the image on the left side, that gives a little bit of a sense of the context, as Seth alluded to, that right now there is not a network of streets or open space in this immediate vicinity. The key axis of this planning area is defined by this red arrow, and that was envisioned as a main street to begin to set up an armature to establish a network of roads and open space in this area. And then that got fleshed out. So in the image on the left, that's the current condition. Hub 25 near the top of that red line establishes the beginning of the street grid. One vision from 2011 is in the middle slide that shows Main Street running down the middle with east-west connections across the site. And it's important to note that one version of the master plan from 2011 envisioned the Boston Globe site going away. That's what you see in the middle image. However, back in 2011, an alternative scenario was envisioned that retained the Globe building in its current site, which is indeed what happened. And at the image on the right, I wanted to point out the street that's running left, right, east, west. That is a street or First Street that Seth will talk about in a little more detail. And I want to point out that this axial connection running from the bottom of the arrow, which is the site of the proposal that you look at tonight, to the top of the arrow where the MBTA station is, was always considered an important connection. And I'll ask the commissioners to focus their attention on the open space between the two buildings you'll review and understands how that serves the axial connection running north-south through the middle of the site. And that concludes my introduction, and I'll hand it back to Christina to facilitate. Thank you.
Great. So we'll turn it over here to the proponent team. Phil and others, are you able to share your screen and unmute yourselves?
Yeah, let me just share screen here, Christine. Let's see if you guys can see it. Okay. Great, how's that?
Looks like it's still loading. It says that you're screen sharing, but it looks, there we go.
Okay.
Great. So Phil will give you guys a 2-minute warning when you're approaching the end of the presentation here.
Great. Good evening, everybody. We'll start out with an overview of the site here, really in the broader context, a little bit to what Seth was alluding to earlier. So you guys can see the site, the Phase 1 site shown in blue in the center of the site here, really at the south end of the approved master plan, with the Morrissey Boulevard frontage to the east, I-93 to the west, and the South End project adjacency just to the south of it. And really you can see the blue line here, really talking about that significant opportunity of the master plan, the idea of this broader, really pedestrian network that works its way through the site from the JFK T station all the way through Savin Hill and all the way really to Dorchester. And then what it really does, we see is setting up this community park is really an integral link in that pedestrian network, as well as being, to some degree, an anchor for community activity. So really focusing on that open space network when we think about this. A quick slide here for everybody, just to talk about all the great work that was done between 2021 and 2023 to get the MPDA approved. And then all those good design guidelines that came out of that not only were you compliant with the metrics of the MPDA, but also these design guidelines that are fairly specific and also talk about dimensional regulations and essentially quality of the spaces. So a little bit about the evolution of the Phase 1 program. You heard it earlier. Building A has now been updated as a residential building. So combined Building A and B in the Phase 1 project, bringing 754 residential units forward in the first phase of the project. So really that critical density of 24/7 activation that residential brings. We're excited by that. You'll also notice in the plan, A Street is included as part of the Phase 1 site. So that becomes not only this new connector, but really that primary approach, both pedestrian and vehicular from Morrissey Boulevard, an important consideration as we think about evolving this in the Phase 1. The remaining program, again, compliant with the master plan, 6,500 square feet of retail, community space within the ground floor and parking spaces below grade of each building. And then most importantly, really maintaining that 23,000 square foot community park, but really recrafting that to think about the Phase 1 and taking advantage of the new approach. You can see on the right-hand side how the program is split. Building A up against the 93 frontage and 392 units, and then Building B is 362 units with the community park in between them, flanked by both buildings. And then just a few broader views in context here. You can see some distant views. The one on the left is looking north down 93. And you start to understand how the Phase 1 participates not only in the full build out of the master plan you can see here, but participates in the skyline and really the immediate context. You see South Line in the foreground here. And in that left-hand image, really the opportunity we have here to build off that adjacency to 93, looking at kind of building off that unique organic form, a curvilinear form for building A, giving that identity and presence to the first phase of the project, knowing that we can recraft that as a residential use. And then building B, a little bit more of an interlocking form building, knowing we want distinct identity, but also creating separation in light and daylight and air between these two buildings. And then to the right, you can see a view looking south down Morrissey Boulevard. Again, you've got the full build out of the master plan in the foreground, and then building A and B really anchoring that southern edge up against the south line frontage. And then a few diagrams about our massing strategy, the evolution of it for phase one. So you can see on the left hand here, the original is contemplated. Building A was as a life science building, so that large floor plate building. And then in the middle here, as we really rethink building A as a residential building, it gives us that opportunity to really carve the massing back. It allows us to bring a lot more daylight and sunlight and reduce shadows in that community park to really improve the environmental conditions there throughout the day. Similarly, on site B, we're actually rotating that massing, stepping that form down as it goes towards the community park. Again, opening up that threshold for light and air, and then really holding that street wall on Morrissey Boulevard as contemplated by the master plan. And then finally, on the right-hand side, really kind of really fine-tuning and sculpting these masses for their use as the residential, really starting to harvest those views to Dorchester Bay, back to the skyline, and starting to reorient and recraft those footprints again to that A Street approach from Morrissey Boulevard for phase one. And now here's a few pedestrian views, just comparative views we want to share to give you a sense of really the impact from a pedestrian view standpoint before and after. So on the left-hand side, we have a view looking down Morrissey Boulevard. You can see A Street in the foreground, building B in the foreground as well, from the prior master plan massing. And then on the right-hand side, these are the updated massings. You can see now these building massings are separated. We get more, again, daylight and air on this open space in the community park, really reducing the shadow impact. If you look at the diagram to the upper right in yellow, you can see the significant daylight that's been increased. This is a snapshot of 1:30 in the day. So really an important environmental consideration there. Also looking at these slender forms for the residential use stepping down to that park. And then also creating these distinctive podiums that were part of the design guidelines as part of the master plan, mitigating that scale of the high rise down to the street edge and really opening up the ground floor plane to that. You can see really what also separation of the building does is it increases that threshold, that gateway opportunity for the community park for those critical sight lines from Morrissey Boulevard, encouraging the community to make its way in. And now here's a rendered view really from that same view. Looking, you see Morrissey Boulevard in the foreground with the A Street approach. And you can see on the left, the building B. Again, the tower sitting atop that sort of distinct architectural podium with a different expression than the building. The building itself is really kind of a simple interlocking form with a pattern of punch windows on it. And then by contrast, looking at building A, really reinforcing these sort of slender stepping forms and a more glacier expression, again, sitting on top of a differentiated podium. And then you start to really get a sense of those sight lines from Morrissey Boulevard from that community park. Again, inviting the community in, now flanked on either side by residential lobbies that tend to bring that 24/7 activation to the space. Similarly, a view looking up A Street, you're looking at here at the building A, which is formerly considered as lab, the larger floor plate. And then on the right, these much more slender forms that the residential use affords us, the daylight and sunlight that's coming through the community park. Now you really start to feel that gateway opportunity, the community park, and inviting folks in. And then this opportunity for identity and presence for both building lobbies off of A Street, knowing that until the master plan is fully built out, that's really going to be the key driver identity for the project. And then a rendered view of that same view, A Street here in the foreground. You start to see this stepped edge of the podium with the retail spilling out, this sort of high transparency in the ground floor, indoor-outdoor activation, allowing for the retail cafe to spill out. Retail frontage making its way up A Street, a consolidated service entry, and then the residential lobby in Building B. Similarly, in Building A, you can see the prominence of the residential lobby, as well as that activation that really lines the community park and that threshold and gateway opportunity for that from Morrissey. Similarly, that view from the massing the highway looking north on 93 is previously contemplated with life science, and now building A again with that slender curvilinear form taking its cues from the highway. And again, building off the alignment with the master plan design guidelines, the idea of a unique and easily recognizable design features, talking about the penthouses as being a singular form. So really building off that identity and presence, but again, making these two forms very distinct and separate within the first phase of the project. And then similarly, a rendered view from that same vantage point, you can see that building a curvilinear form and really reinforcing the horizontals when we think about a facade strategy to really bring that curving form to life. And then at the ends, the very slender verticals and a glassy sort of expression, really reinforcing that slenderness. And then the separation between the two buildings, and then building B being a very kind of straightforward intersecting form of contrasting materials with a much more punch window expression, giving itself some distinction from building A. And here's a view of the community park. We're looking north now between building A and B, and this is really the exciting part of thinking about this as a community asset. The idea of facilitating that pedestrian connectivity from Southline, which is in the foreground here, that courtyard all the way through the site, flanked on either side by very active podiums. We're looking at community civic space, residential amenities and retail space, as well as more residential amenity and lobby on either side. Residential terracing and balconies, sort of, again, giving those sort of eyes on the park, that 24/7 activation. And then this opportunity for a variety of spaces within the community park, both for multi-use large-scale events, gathering and performances, and then these smaller sort of discovery spaces that allow for some more kind of contemplative moments. Zooming into the site plan quickly here, we've really recrafted each ground floor plan to reorient it, again, to this A Street approach off of Morrissey Boulevard. You can see the sort of serrated edge of the ground floor of Building B, lined with active retail and multiple corners for visibility. The consolidation of that service entry into a single bay of frontage for loading and parking, really minimizing that impact in the ground plane. And then that prominent lobby sort of welcoming people into the open community park there. Again, amenity and civic space lining the active edges on the park. And then similarly, Building A, looking at that lobby with that prime visual identity, kind of anchoring the site with active residential amenities along the park, further retail and community civic along A Street, and then consolidating loading and parking really up against I-93 off of West Street. You're also starting to understand a little bit about the conceptualization of the community park, the sort of incredible asset we see as part of this first phase, and really thinking about this with Arcadis in a series of conceptual ways. First being this gateway plaza, you see this 165 feet of opening up those sight lines, and thinking about that as sort of a hardscape welcoming plaza, sort of a mediating place between the sidewalk and then this open multi-use lawn, the idea of a multi-purpose space that is terminated by a gathering and performance, trellis and stage, the idea of a number of activities that can take place there, and then lining those edges with these smaller spaces, potentially discovery park for kids, dog walking spaces, and smaller seating areas just for facilitating that pedestrian, again, connectivity throughout that park. And then just a couple of three-dimensional views, just giving you a sense of that approach again from A Street here, looking at that gateway plaza, bringing the greenscape forward with this lining of trees, starting to see the activation of the lobby, drawing you into the multi-use event lawn. And then similarly on the right, a view of the multi-event lawn looking back towards A Street, seeing the activation of both buildings on either side, and really the opportunity for a variety of activities for community gatherings that we're excited about. And I think that's it for our summary presentation today. So happy to take questions and comments from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. And if you wouldn't mind, just briefly stop sharing. I think we just have a couple more comments from Seth, and then we'll ask you to put up a site plan during deliberation.
Thank you. So as the planning department has begun to review this scheme, we're of course focused on the public realm and the relationship of the buildings to the public realm, both as this project will exist in its current condition or in the current, let's say, phase 1 build condition, as well as the future build out of improvements along the 3575 master plan, as well as Morrissey Boulevard. So very much interrogating the relationship of the park configuration and park design with the future Civic Plaza that's located sort of page top right, the future Main Street, that was that axial relationship in the center that Ted spoke to, as well as to the current South Line complex with its courtyard that you see here on the bottom of the page, as well as any potential future redevelopment of the South Line site in many, many years. Do the buildings themselves successfully define the edges and activity along Morrissey, both as it exists today and as it will exist in the future, A Street and the community park, and very much also focusing on the importance of A Street as the front door and access to the proposed development here, but also making sure that we set this up for success in the future with the full build out. But in the interim condition, making sure that we have enough turning movements and ability to have this function as a true sort of main street to the development. Next, please. As the design goes through further refinement, we're looking to further understand the program of the open spaces and establishing stronger connections between the active uses within the building and the open spaces, and continue to advance the materiality and form of the podium at the base of the buildings, especially the frame elements at Building B. And with that, turn it back to the proponent and the commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil, I think it would be helpful if you would pull up your slide deck and maybe go to a site plan, and commissioners, you can raise your hand, and I see that Commissioner Kim has her hand raised, so go ahead.
Great.
Thanks. Thanks, Phil. This looks great. I mean, I think my first reaction is about the project as a whole, and I do appreciate seeing these early. I'm getting used to it, like seeing these things before they're fully gelled, but I do appreciate your including us in this process. It does feel to me, if I just take like that central space, including the facades of the lobbies and the amenity spaces in that central community park, that there's a kind of complexity to this project that I think as you develop this further, that it would be helpful to kind of make things speak to each other more. I feel like in general, like I'll give you an example, like the trellis of the gathering performance space and then the kind of arcades around the building, each of which are different. Maybe there's a way in which they could be cousins to each other. And so I understand, I'll have my fellow commissioners talk about the architecture in general, but I just wonder if there's some kind of way in which the architecture can more embrace that central space and feel like that the elements are working together to create a more cohesive experience. It feels maybe overly complex, but I do think that there's a kind of programming, there's a very smart programming layout for the community space. So I do support that in general with a real diversity of uses. But there's something about, as you're developing this, that even the way the pathways are shaped, that they're bumping up against the building and each other in ways that are a little bit awkward right now. So I would just ask for you guys to take a look and see if there are ways of really kind of making this more cohesive as an experience, even though I think that if you drew a diagram of all the programming, I really believe it. I think that it'll be a really successful community space.
Thank you, McYoung. David Hassin?
Thank you. And if I have connection problems, I apologize. I'll defer. But I agree very much with what Mick Young said. First of all, I want to mention that I very much appreciate the fact that these are two large housing projects that will add this dynamism to this neighborhood. And I also very much like the twist in the long path that better connects the South Line development to the future of the district. I must say I find myself agreeing with quite a few of Seth's comments about the overall the issues that are to be explored. And I agree with Commissioner Kim that it feels a little complex. Now I'm talking about the architectural massing. And I do wish that there was a little bit more of a conversation between the two buildings, architecturally and formally. And I say that in part because I say that in part because I was driving down Boylston Street just today, looking at the Pierce and how its podium and the form participates in the very careful composition of the street, and how much it breaks that street wall, and in a way that I find complicated and unsatisfying. And I'm a little concerned that the podium on Morrissey Boulevard and the twisted building there is doing the same thing in that location as what the future of Morrissey Boulevard might look and feel like. So because I'm going in and out, I will leave it to other commissioners to talk about, but I would appreciate a little bit more simplicity and a little bit more conversation between the two buildings. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, David. Anne Marie?
I too agree with the comments of Seth and my fellow commissioners, and let me try to be a little bit sort of add a level of detail to this. And one thing I know, a theme that has come up, I believe possibly in an earlier review of the initial plan for this, is sort of how, when we look at projects that are of this scale and involve multiple buildings, the design considers them as an ensemble. As it is, it appears that these are two independent structures, while the facade treatment might be similar. They just read to me as objects in a space. And I am particularly concerned about the serrated edge along Morrissey Boulevard. I would like to better understand and frankly see a response to the different conditions on the site, that, you know, Morrissey Boulevard, which is a very busy street, versus A Street, which, as Seth mentioned, really serves as the front door to the development. And I also have some practical questions as to, if I'm picking somebody up or dropping somebody off, where does that happen? One of the wonderful things about this overall development is that that central corridor, that public realm, creates a bit of an oasis in a very busy environment. So how does the design of the space reflect it? And as that central space is designed right now, it just seems like one large open space. So not only am I interested in a better understanding, you know, the programming of it, but how the design responds to it, how frankly, if I live in the building, you know, I would be eager to find a quiet space within that. Or if I'm walking through the site, is there a place where I might pause and maybe have a coffee? And it feels a bit like frankly, a green thoroughfare to me. So I think how can, and just think about how the base of the buildings relate to the site and to each other, how the site reads as an ensemble, and also the you know, some of the you know, thinking about the practicalities of what does it mean to be a gateway to this, particularly what distinguishes this as a residential complex, which I too am thrilled to see this be housing, versus you know, a commercial office or tech space.
Thank you, Anne Marie. David Manfredi?
There's been a lot of very good comments already. I won't repeat them all, but I'll ask the proponent to address this question. And it was a question that our colleague Eric Howler used to ask, and I'm reminded of it on projects like this. I'm confused about what these two buildings, and I hesitate calling the pair of buildings, what do they have in common and what makes them different? They clearly are linked to each other. They are part of an ensemble. They share this ground plane. They share a kind of broad bulk sense of massing. But then I get kind of lost. I get kind of lost when I'm trying to understand what do they have and what makes them an ensemble and what separates them. And I'm not suggesting that there should be more or less of either. Right now, I'm sort of confused as to what the direction is in terms of their relationship to each other, what the intentional relationship is to each other. So there was some very good comments about, and I would also ask the proponent just to help us understand, or the planning department. I don't know that I'm current on what's happening with the future of Morrissey Boulevard in terms of infrastructure, and I'd love to know more about that. Morrissey Boulevard's a very, very difficult street. Almost impossible to imagine retail activity, any kind of strong pedestrian sense until it's reconfigured in some way. And I know it's hard because the volume of traffic is so significant, but a little bit of tutorial on that would be helpful for me to understand how to think about the ground level, especially of the building that faces Morrissey. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Kirk Sykes.
Great, thank you. So lots of great comments. I think in the interest of offering something else that I think might be helpful is the cues that are presented to the so many people that'll pass the building on the highway side of this great alley that you're creating on the interior. You know, there is a public realm that could be unnoticed or could be celebrated. And to that end, I guess I would ask maybe three things. One, about the podium and its views or allowed views into this LA, as well as sort of referential statements in the podium self-greenery activity, you know, a sense of place beyond. And then tops, how the buildings actually are finished. So from the long view, they sort of herald that people should get off the expressway, you know, where they can on the eastern edge to experience and get to here. And so to that end, I think it would be helpful to sort of look at what's been done to date around the central artery and what worked and what didn't. And, you know, think a bit about ink block as it went up and the views in and what made us want to go there or get off and experiencing it. So those are some of the thoughts that I think apply not just to the two buildings here, but to the buildings to come that are referenced in the PDA master plan and how they invite people into this public realm that you're creating. So I'll stop with that. Thanks.
Thanks, Kirk. Shauna?
Thanks, Phil, for the presentation. And overall, it's a very exciting project. I think this project also, just this part of it, has a lot of potential. I'm not going to echo, but I do agree with many of the comments of my colleagues. And with respect to the overall complexity and the different languages in it, I think the project's a little bit hard for me to understand from a streetscape perspective. So whether it is a walk around, you know, like a flyby or stroll by, or a series of streetscape sections moving around the project, I think would be really helpful to understand not only the streetscape, which on Morrissey Boulevard was represented differently in almost every view. So I don't know if there's street trees there or not street trees there, bike lane there or not bike lane there. And I may just be confused with with which views of the project, but just understanding that I do feel that the project needs some level of protection from Morrissey. You know, street trees are planting along that sidewalk. And then just really reaching out on both sides, feeling how the project to at least halfway through Morrissey and all the way to 93 from a sectional perspective, just to really understand the scale of the moves. And yeah, and also just understand the feeling of things like the serrated edge that we're talking about, or the scale of the very large podium archways. But thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing the project in subcommittee.
Thank you, Shauna. Bill?
Yes, Phil, thank you for your presentation and I think your building A looks very promising. I'm not going to repeat everything that everyone else has said, and I want to be gentle here, but I think there's been it's been absolutely unanimous questioning of the relationship of building B to building A. And I just want to say that I think you should start over on building B. I really do, because if you bring in minor changes to this and we try to go to a second and third meeting, and we're trying to cut down the number of meetings we have, we're running the risk, quite frankly, that by dint of time, we might start approving a building that obviously the last 7 people who've talked have raised serious questions, together with the serious questions raised by Seth. And so Phil, I'm sorry to say it, but I would urge, you've got a perfectly decent building in building A, and can't we start over with building B? And I say that in trying to be nice, but I just to put us through minor revisions to building B, thinking that that is what is being discussed here, I think is not the kind of review that you have just heard. So, and you may want to respond to that.
You know, I think it's a good point. Understanding the context of the comments. I think there's a tension between distinguishing the buildings and then the cousins and that familiarity. You know, I think it goes beyond the podiums. I think we were looking to start to interpret the design guidelines out of the master plan, but I think it's quite early, and I think there's a lot of evolution that can come from these comments, to your point, Bill. Whether it's a full redesign of B or not, I think we need to take a look at that. You know, I think there's form and mass, and then there's going to be exterior expression. But I think you guys bring up good points about, you know, how are these going to be cohesive together yet distinguish themselves? And then when we think about the highway adjacency versus the Morrissey adjacency, very, very different, right? And really all around that site. So I think those are good comments to take in. I think we'll take a look at building B. And I think if we look at those adjacencies at the ground level, how does maybe that influence the building in rethinking some of that, Bill, to your point? Because those adjacencies are quite varied, but quite important to really be successful for the project, the way we see it, I think.
Bill, can I ask
All
a
right.
question?
Sure.
Just to respond to your comments. Why, and I agree with Bill, by the way, I think there's a building A is quite elegant in many ways. I guess my question is, why can't these be a pair, or why shouldn't these be a pair? Why do they need to be so distinctly different from each other in your mind? I mean, is it a marketing issue? Are they being marketed to different groups of people? Or because to Anne Marie's earlier comment about an ensemble, like I can very easily imagine looking at this image and almost imagining a kind of yin and yang of 2 buildings on this site that would be curved and dynamic and beautiful in relationship to each other, doing all the things that you want it to do in terms of solar orientation, and maybe actually helping shape a more cohesive space on the ground floor, as I believe Mick Young Kim was maybe asking about. So I think that we're in an era where a lot of these developments feel like they're more sculpture parks than cohesive urban designed communities. And I just want to challenge that notion a little bit. So that would be my question. Why?
You know, I think it was this fine balancing act we're trying to achieve, David, and I think we've gone maybe too far at distinguishing them. I think an ensemble is a great way to honestly describe these two. Yin and yang as well. So there's a common language and a common thread. I think we can work on that. So we're gonna feel that this is a cohesive site, because really, you know, when we think about the adjacencies to that park, I go back to that park view. You know, how can that feel a little bit more cohesive together as a full project, you know, in that scale. So Let us go back and take a look at it. These are great comments, I think, coming at it as we've kind of looked at it, you know, in isolation a little bit without the feedback. So this has been helpful.
All right, and we have a last comment by Laura Solano.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. You rightly so talked about, you know, the potential power for the community park to provide a calming for the buildings as well as unifying them. And yet there's a level of chopping up of the landscape that I think is taking away from that. Do you mind going to the plan? And then I'll want to come back to the perspectives.
Sure.
When I look at this, there are so many pathways that kind of repeat themselves. And what the north-south paths in particular do is they kind of suburbanize the buildings in the sense that they give a space for planting at the base, like you would see in a suburban, you know, a suburban neighborhood. And I think that you could celebrate the urban nature of this and then its future as well, right? Where you're going to basically let this kind of set the tone for it. And I remember when we were looking at the master plan, you know, we talked a lot about sort of the urbanity of the project as a whole. And I find there's a lot of double circulation going on in the east-west as you go north-south. So for instance, if I look at the Southline Courtyard, and it was in the perspective before, there's a public walk, then there's a middle walk, and then there's another, you know, another paved space. And it starts to feel like landscape is not something continuous that can kind of unify these buildings, but just is chopped up as, you know, as the architecture entrances are. I don't think it's really doing anything that kind of gives this sense of calm as you walk into it. Introducing more air and light is just so terrific. I'm so happy you did that. And I question whether or not you need that much of an event lawn, and if somehow putting that in there has sort of forced you into this, you know, walkways that serve each building. Like, where is the opportunity for the residents of each building to come together? And by that, I don't mean just into an event lawn, an open space, because I don't think people know in the city how to use a lawn very well. And so are there, I can't remember which commissioner said it, but are there ways to make rooms that are not tiny, but generous and allow people to do people watching and, you know, come together? And the event lawn feels overscaled to me. And that it, by cutting it back a little bit, you may give more opportunity to have that back and forth, that east-west motion that isn't just on the perimeter of the buildings. Could you go to the view that's on the other side as well? I think you have one. Yeah, I'm wondering about the welcoming that the park does to get inside the buildings, inside the space between the buildings, because, you know, how do you welcome the public in there so that it doesn't feel like there's a barrier at the edge? Is there a way that kind of funnels people in and doesn't necessarily push them to the sides right away? And I think that's something that needs to be investigated on both the north and the south. I'm not sure I understand the relationship to Southline, like how the grades work. And I know we just saw that perspective with the steps in it, but I'd like to understand that a little bit more. So I think kind of turning the dial more towards the landscape itself and letting it be that calming and unifying device that you talked about at the beginning. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. And Mick Young?
I just have a quick recommendation as you come forward in future meetings. It might be helpful, or it's something that we do in our office that's very helpful, is to maybe draw some very clear and simple diagrams of what's the intention of the project. Because I can hear different people interpreting the project in different ways. And I think, Phil, you guys are the designers. And so you should come to us with a very strong diagram to say, this is what this project is about. And if there's a way of really simplifying like the architectural elements and their intentions in diagram form, as well as Laura talked about, the pathways and the kind of covered spaces, it just might be helpful to pull back. I can see that this is like early on, and often that happens in the design process. You get a little kind of, there's many different ideas in here, and the diagram kind of pushes us, all of us as designers, to really say what's important. And so I would just, it'd be great to see that in a future subcommittee meeting, like what are the guiding principles of the project? Is it two very different projects? Is it one kind of cohesive thing? I think I'd love to hear more from you and your team about what is it, what's the intention here? So I think having some very simple diagrams would be very helpful.
Thank you, Mick Young. Seth?
And just quickly, in regards to the commissioner's questions about the future of Morrissey Boulevard, we'll be asking the proponent to come back in subcommittee with both some more detailed drawings about how the building relates to Morrissey Boulevard as it is today, as well as how it is planned to be in the future. And while we have Ted here, thought we'd just give him the floor quickly to update the full commission on where the Morrissey study stands.
Thanks, Seth. And if you could go back to the site plan slide, I just wanted to make the commissioners aware that we're not sure exactly what the dimensions are yet, but the state has convened the Morrissey Commission, and if you can see where I'm annotating that there'll be more separation in the state's right-of-way from the heavy traffic. So roughly speaking, this zone will be a combination of perhaps active mobility, bike path, or some sort of green open space. And then also there'll be a slight grade uphill that's part of the climate resilience. So as you think about this active retail edge, just be aware that it'll be a little bit further removed from the high speed traffic, and that street section is to be determined. So thanks, Seth. Hopefully that helps clarify things for what the subcommittee will discuss.
Thanks, Ted and Seth. All right, I think we had a lot of excellent comments from the commissioners. In the interest of time, Christina, let's go to see if we have any public testimony, and then I'll summarize the comments and include a comment or two of my own at the end.
Great. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press *9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function, and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioners, at this time, I see no hands raised, so we will close the public comment period.
Great. So I was taking down notes because I thought we heard a lot of excellent feedback from the commissioners. And so I'll just go over them. but I'm sure you were taking your own notes. I think the commission is asking you to come back with guiding principles and diagrams of how to understand your sites. What are the main, goals that you're trying to achieve here on the site, so that we can understand your basic urban design strategies. We've asked to come with more cohesive strategies for the buildings to think about, where are they similar, where are they different? Think about the relationship of the tower to the podium. Right now, there was conversations about them maybe not being completely related to each other. So we'd love to understand a little bit more about that, and even possibly rethinking building B. We will leave that up to you. There was talk about the serrated edge along Morrissey Boulevard, and it was helpful to hear some of Ted's comments, but it put a lot of questions in my mind what that actually means. So that would be helpful to see as we are seeing that edge further developed. Programs and scale of the landscape. And I would add the programs on the ground floor buildings. I know where you got to. You had very different strategies in the PDA master plan. Have there been other, considerations you've looked at? I think we want to ensure that the retail is successful if located on Morrissey Boulevard, but have you thought of other strategies? It'd be nice to know that. And I saw some second floor activation. It'd be also good to see a second floor plan to see what you have planned on that floor. What does it mean to be a gateway project? That would be an interesting conversation to understand from your perspective. And we need more information on the streetscape. A video would be great to walk around, but it could be still images just to get a sense of all of the sides of your large block. I think those are the main things that I have. I won't let it go without saying that I'm happy to see that they're both housing buildings, much better than a lab building. So that's a huge win for the city, and bringing air and light is always welcome. So we're very happy to work with that as a starting point.
Mimi, if I could add that we'd like to see some more study on the scale of the interior spaces in the landscape, as well as the relationship and circulation of those spaces, between those spaces, and how the landscape can better unify those buildings.
Of course. Thank you, Laura. All right. And with that, I think we need a motion.
So moved.
I would assume I need a motion to
Oh.
send to subcommittee or to do something. So
Move to send the project to subcommittee.
second. All right. Thank you. And so I'm going to call in all the commissioners. Shauna?
May I just ask a question?
Yes.
Is there a way, given how strongly the group felt, to have if we're moving it to subcommittee, shouldn't we indicate that, in fact, particularly relating to building B, that we're only doing that as a procedural thing and not indicating any approval? Or I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
But,
No, I think
we're sending it to subcommittee just like every other project.
Right.
Is not indicating the level of concern that has been expressed here.
So I think that's a good comment, Bill. And I think because we have Seth and the planning department, I'm sure we have a project manager, they're going to hear these comments. I would assume, and maybe we should just get clarity, that you're going to work with a proponent team and make sure that they're addressing these comments before you would send them to subcommittee.
Could we just add that kind of language to it?
If somebody gives me a motion,
I would say, subject to proviso that planning department staff work closely with the proponent to consider those comments shared in this meeting.
And a second?
Second.
All right. Shauna?
Yes.
David Haseen?
Yes.
Mick Young Kim?
Yes.
Anne Marie Lubinow?
Yes.
David Manfredi,
Yes, yes. Sorry.
Catherine Morris,
Yes.
Bill Ron,
Yes.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
Kirk Sykes,
Yes.
and myself, yes. So I think you heard from the commissioners, and we look forward to seeing all of the revisions based on these comments. And I think with that, we'll move on to the next project, which is 250 Bay State Road, Boston University Pardee School of Global Studies. We did see a peek of this in the IMP process, but I'm going to pass it on to either Seth or Ted to give us a update on what we're going to see.
Thank you. I'll kick it off. Tonight we're viewing the Pardee School building. This proposal is for 70,000 square feet of institutional use in a 12-story building that's 186 feet tall on a 1.3 acre site. Just to remind the group that this was recently reviewed as part of BU's recent IMP update. Next slide, please. So the planning and zoning context has already been established, as has the zoning envelope for this building through the recent IMP process. On this map, this is building labeled CC right in the middle of the map. And then just to situate this in the larger neighborhood context, I'd like to call everyone's attention to the adjacency to the Charles River and the Esplanade and Starrow Drive just to the north of this site. And then also, this is the terminus of Bay State Road, which comes in from the east. And to speak a little more detail on these issues, I'll now hand it over to Seth. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Next slide, please. So the site is located on the campus's embankment above the Charles River, nestled between Commonwealth Avenue and Soldiers Field Road within the heart of BU Central Campus. This area has a predominant fabric of mid-rise institutional buildings west of Granby Street, and low-rise residential buildings east of Granby Street, punctuated by iconic moments such as the Marsh Chapel and Plaza along Commonwealth Avenue, as well as taller punctuating icons such as Jose Luis Cert's Law School Tower to the west of Marsh Chapel and the recently completed Computing and Design Sciences Center to the east of Granby Street. You also see Warren Towers on the bottom right of page, the renovation of which was recently approved by this commission. The historic low and mid-rise fabric of this area is complemented and contrasted by the area's own mini skyline. The superblock is formally organized by Commonwealth Ave and the strong edge-defining campus buildings on the south, with a variegated edge on the north where parking lots and underutilized open spaces address the BU beach and views across the Charles. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the proponent to present.
Just realized I was on mute, and I was just noting that Commissioners Ron and Commissioner Solanos are recused from this review.
Lizzie, have we promoted folks to co-host?
Yes, they should be promoted. It looks like Sean Gallagher, who I recently promoted, has left the meeting. I don't know if they're planning on returning.
Is anybody who's supposed to be presenting able to raise their hand if you're not able to unmute yourself from the BU team?
I'm here from the
Oh,
beat.
hi, Chris.
And texting Sean furiously to see.
That's okay.
So just one moment, please.
Sure thing.
And if we're having problems with Sean getting in, may it make sense to jump ahead to the urban design review slides, which will give a little prematurely to the slideshow, but hopefully give Sean a little time.
I think that makes sense, Seth.
Yeah, sounds great. Sean
Sound-
is under Eduardo, is what we're getting. So you might need to elevate.
Let's
Eduardo
try elevating Eduardo and see if.
Eduardo is last name Ponce,
Mhm.
I'm assuming.
Yep.
Yes.
Sean, let me know if you are elevated and able to unmute.
I am unmuted now and elevated. Hello, everybody. Can you see me?
Yes.
I had two names into the system. I am so sorry. Let me share my screen.
Sean, we'll give you 10 minutes when you're ready to get started and a 2-minute
Okay.
warning.
Okay. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. All right, so let's see if I can see the time. Good. Perfect. All right. Great. Okay. So I think we'll start. So hello, obviously everyone, I'm Sean Gallagher, but I'm also being joined by Chris Donahue, who is from Principal and BV, because obviously, as we know, we saw this previously at the IMP process. It involves a lot of landscape, which is really part of the proposal, a big chunk of the proposal as well. As we know, we went through the IMP process, and it was about 70,000 square feet with a maximum building height of about 186 feet that we kind of defined in that process. But what we really heard was that there were questions that you guys brought up in the initial presentation about characteristics of the landscape, characteristics of the building. Exciting to see how that would be developed. What were their relationships, and how does this building work as an academic building in the massing form that it is? And hopefully we can add that part of our process and our thinking as we were developing the design, and we can kind of walk through that today in the 10 minutes. But starting at the beginning, as we all understand, you know, the site itself was doing a lot more than just a parking lot site. So we really wanted to kind of improve the campus connectivity, and we pushed the building itself off of the main part of the site and behind Sci Hall up against the lot land wall. And by doing this, we were able to create over an acre of green space by reducing the footprint. And we felt this was really important, and is one of the reasons why the building mass then went taller than shorter. But the idea was that this would actually set up something that would be able to be a future central green, or at least start to define the language for the future central green of Boston University. And so we're really excited about that. And it's a really big component right off the Charles River, and for these campuses to kind of improve on their social and their gathering spaces and their natural and ecological spaces. And so I'm going to let Chris jump in here and start to talk about the landscape and how this starts to set up the kind of foundation for a larger central green in the future.
Thanks, Sean. And thanks, everyone. I said it last time, but I'll say it again. It's a kick to get to present the landscape before we even see the building. I think it speaks to what the really important piece of this project is in terms of campus making. We heard a lot from you all about what this landscape could do, that even though it's just an acre, that it needs to draw from a much larger landscape. And that larger landscape, of course, being the Charles River. And so we've begun to think about this landscape as sort of a gradient, one that is quite urbane up at the sort of north corner of it, connecting to Admissions Plaza, an entry grove that connects into the forum of the building, a very public first floor, open public first floor, a large meadow in the middle that serves as both a civic lawn for campus events and a woodland that helps to frame this landscape with an ecological, dense woodland frame. Go ahead. And that gradient expresses itself both through planting and through the organization of planting. We see that entry grove as being somewhere that people can sit comfortably under the canopy of trees. That arrival sequence has a relationship to the Charles River, in some ways acting as an extension of BU Beach, so an accessible, comfortable place to sit under the canopy of trees that pull from the language of the Charles River Esplanade. The meadow being a place to gather, a place where people are sitting on an open lawn, framed by a diverse canopy of trees again, and shrubs and understory plants that bring diversity to something other than just a lawn, and that pocket woodland that sort of creeps around the backside of the quad to frame a more to provide a more ecological frame that provides urban canopy, carbon sequestration, and biodiversity. To look at that cross section and how it relates to the river, we've elevated the landscape a bit as we go back or south into the site and pull away from the Charles River, so that we get expanded views and sort of extend the life and the atmosphere of the Charles River Esplanade and BU Beach. That can, as I said, the entry grove having a high canopy and becoming more and more diverse as we get back into the woodland frame that wraps around the south and east leg of the site. Good. And so to look at how, I believe, David, you asked the question or highlighted how the importance of these landscapes having specific roles and how they relate to the programming. The entry plaza being a spill out space from the forum for lectures and dialogues that happen within the building. Reading Bosque that happens at that entry plaza, sort of outdoor classrooms in some ways. How the lawn provides place for larger events, yoga, movies, sports on an open lawn, a lawn that does not exist on BU currently, and how those outdoor gathering areas or outdoor reading rooms and classrooms can be framed by the canopy of trees in the southern area of the woodland. Go ahead. And so looking at these through expressive sort of renderings of each of these landscape types, an entry grove that pulls from the canopy of Bay State Road and connects with warm materials into the interior of the building. Go ahead. An open lawn in the middle, that meadow that's framed by an ecological, a biodiverse native meadow that frames that new lawn, place for events, but also for biodiversity. Go ahead. And then these smaller scale outdoor rooms that become reading rooms, outdoor classrooms, places for people to come out from CAS and have lunch out on the quad in a more intimately scaled place under the canopy of trees. Good. And just looking at how that material blends from the interior, the warmth of the interior out into the expressive bark of the trees in the entry grove, warm wood benches that are, of course, accessible and comfortable, and evergreen trees that provide some life throughout all 4 seasons.
And it was important for us to really sort of bring these ideas from the landscape and actually kind of build on the way that we can make our urban environments more natural, more healthy, more sustainable places, and kind of bring that warmth and that landscape into the building, and kind of develop that kind of connection. And for us, you know, it wasn't about just bringing it down at the bottom of the floor, but it was about actually bringing it up to all the spaces that are within the building itself and really kind of have this warmth, this kind of more natural kind of feeling, be part of the urban experience, be part of the BU Pardee Center of Global Studies experience. So how do we get here? Just kind of backtracking a little bit and thinking about it, one of the things that's really interesting about the Pardee School of Global Studies, beyond its mission, is that the school is distributed through many different brownstones along Bay State Road. So they're kind of moved around all these places. And because of this, they developed this culture within the school itself, where they're actually used to collaborating and meeting in these kind of warmer, smaller environments, these living room spaces, and these kind of with a little bit of libraries, a little bit of exhibit space, artifacts. And what worried us was that this intimacy would be lost when we moved this into a traditional academic building or a building at a larger scale. And so what we began to think about was how do we actually break down that scale internally, really thinking about on the internal side of it, their experiences working with the school. So we started to organize into multiple little neighborhoods inside the buildings, so very much like many little brownstones, and stack them vertically. And what the idea was that each one of these spaces, each one of these neighborhoods you would come into, and it would be a centralized living room space, which would have an opening to the facade, but also then be connected to this collaboration network, other small meeting spaces, and classroom spaces where people would teach and actually work together. And that this would be kind of the structure of the interior of the building, so there wouldn't be long hallways and things that actually break down and make the scale much larger feeling inside the building. And so instead of cladding all these spaces in wood or kind of trying to imitate what we were doing in the past with the brownstones, we looked at building with wood. We looked at mass timber. Could we make the structure of the building mass timber? And what we did was we said, if we could do that, we could just expose the mass timber and actually not bring extra materials to the process, but the structure of the building itself became these warm spaces. And what we found with our project is that the massing type would actually fit within type 4B construction for mass timber. So it's as of right, but there is one catch with this because it's all new and it's kind of evolving with our codes. We can only expose 20% of the mass timber structure in type 4B construction in high-rise construction. So we started thinking about this and thought, so what if we began to carve away at all the other spaces and expose the living room spaces, expose the collaboration spaces, the lobby, the event space, the classrooms, and start to actually make those the spaces that see the mass timber itself? Where would we be at with the percentage wise of surface area? And I'm not gonna lie, we got lucky. We just happened that the program was about 19% when we started calculating all the individual surface areas. So we were kind of pushing things around here and there to kind of make this work. And so what we found, we were about 19%, which gives us a little bit of room for error when we're doing this. But that wasn't it. We also wanted the community to see these spaces and vice versa. From the inside, you actually be able to connect with something significant on the outside or significant that's part of the neighborhood. So we started to carve and arrange spaces at key moments as you moved around the tower that could connect back to the community. So we opened up at the bottom at the admissions plaza. Then we circled around so you can get a little bit of height and look down beautiful Bay State Road. Then we moved up a little bit higher just above the tree line. And so you can actually see the river, and it had the classrooms just above that tree line. And then we kind of moved it more east so you could see downtown as you got higher into the building. And we thought that each one of these things would actually start to define the movement that you saw of the mass timber through the tower. And so in the end, you really start to see that the expression of the building, as we talked about in the IMP process, it's a very tight skin, the minimal amount of surface area is doing all the things sustainable that you want to have done for building in the future. But at the same time has this kind of vibrant network of where the Pardee program actually becomes the expression of the building within the warmth of the overall collaboration network. And so at the bottom, it opens up to the public space, to the admissions plaza, and becomes more of a kind of front door for coming into this new central green space. And then as you move back down Bay State Road, or you move to the north or to the south of the site, you start to see the rest of the spaces where people are actually collaborating, socializing, and doing the work that the Pardee School is doing to try to create more sustainable communities, both economically, socially, and environmentally around the world. And so I wanted to keep to like 10 minutes, and I think we're 11 in. So, Christina, I think I went over by one. So
Thanks, Sean. Before we
but-
start actual deliberations, can I turn it over to Seth real quick for just a couple additional comments, and then commissioners, we're happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christina and team. So we applaud the project for removing over an acre of surface parking and creating new campus open space in the near term that will connect to a long-term vision of an expanded central cod for the campus, as well as for the project's environmental goals and use of mass timber. Specifically looking at the site plan, we're really interested in understanding how can the proposed landscape better visually and physically connect to the BU Beach and the Charles River beyond, and how can this new landscape make better accessible connections to nearby open spaces, particularly the Marsh Chapel Plaza, Commonwealth Avenue, the BU Beach, and specifically the Admissions Plaza. And how can the turnaround, which is at the sort of right-hand number 2 there, be rethought to allow for safer pedestrian and bicycle connections while also serving the admission center and the loading and service needs of the adjacent buildings and back of house. Next, please. And specifically with the circle, it's a level of detail that we look forward to getting into with the proponent. But here is where the vehicle route overlaps and interrupts the alignment of pedestrian sidewalks. And so we're looking to see how we can improve the public realm, moving from this critical moment of Bay State Road, which feels like some public right-of-way, into the heart of the campus. Next slide. Architecturally, of course, we're interested in how does the building really engage and meet the ground, and how does it engage and meet the sky. The success of this building will obviously depend very much on material selection and detailing. And so we're focused very much on working with the proponent on the selection of glazing and all materials and treatment thereof to make sure that the desired look and feel that we're seeing in the renderings is actually realized in the building as it evolves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seth. Commissioners, Mick Young? Maybe Sean, if we can have you pull up your presentation, start maybe with a site plan, that would be helpful.
I think there's a lot to like about this project. I think there's a lot of interesting efforts towards finding new ways of using materiality. I think BU has become an exciting place where new architecture is being tried on campus. And so I really do appreciate that. I just have one question. I'm going to pass this over to my fellow commissioners, which is, this is a center for global initiatives for, I imagine, kind of diversity and inclusion, and a place where many different colors come together if we're thinking about studying the world. And I would love to just hear more about, just in terms of both the building and the landscape, as you're selecting materials, as you're developing the kind of landscape design, how, because it's a very unique building type, and I'm sure you've thought about this. I'd like to just understand better how this very handsome building and the kind of notions of sustainability and mass timber, which I applaud all of it. But I wonder if there's another layer that really tells people from the outside that there's this tapestry of different kinds of studies that happen both outside and inside that really mark this as a special place. And so I would just ask to understand that better as we move forward.
Thank you, Mick Young. Any other commissioners? Shauna?
So I can follow. And thank you very much for this very beautiful presentation. I wasn't involved with any of the IMP process, so it's actually the first time, other than a little bit of media, that I've seen it. I'm going to talk primarily about the landscape, which I think is quite lovely. I think, Chris, you had mentioned, and I think the large moves are actually very strong. I echo Seth's interest in making accessible connections to the chapel and to Commonwealth Ave as we're working on this project. I think, Chris, you had mentioned expressive renderings, and I think they are really beautiful and really expressive. But I don't fully understand the project through the renderings. I don't understand the height and scale of the mounds. It looks like they're about, at least in some places, 20 feet high. So I think, and I don't understand the relationship to the Graduate School of Arts and Science. So I think having some less expressive and perhaps more informative information when we look at it next to really understand. And I do understand this section, but this section doesn't have the, this is kind of super stripped down. There are no mounts. So I know this is probably cut through the hardscape, but trying something in between those two would be really helpful. And I really love the idea of this relationship between the landscape and the architecture. And you had mentioned the relationship between the entry, between the forum and the grove outside the entry grove. And I'm curious how that, I know it's a material connection, but the wood inside will be different than the wood outside. So are there other ways that indoor-outdoor connection can be made? It's quite just from this perspective, it looks like quite a tight space in one of the views as well. So really understanding the robustness of that connection further, and how the landscape, whether it's whether it's with the form or some way that the material connection, the indoor-outdoor material connection can be furthered. I also love the idea of these living rooms in the building. And in the building, it's kind of a simple architecture with expressive moments of these living rooms. And I'm wondering, without, I think the landscape strategy is smart and quite beautiful, but are there ways that some of that same thinking about about articulate living rooms in the landscape can be pushed a little bit further? Again, because most of the renderings are quite expressive, I don't fully understand understand the overall character of them. I'm very excited about it, and I just want to understand things a little bit more explicitly when we next meet.
Thanks, Shauna. Kirk? I think you're on mute, Kirk.
I knew that would happen. A terrific presentation, and I do love that you thought so intentionally about growing this from the ground up, and from the landscape into the building. I really like what Mick Young said about trying to express more of the intentionality of the programming in the public realm. And I think, to me, some of where I see that maybe least at the moment is where the building meets the ground plane. And whether it's how the building reaches out into the landscape or how the landscape reaches up into the building, I think there's some opportunities on the first and second floors in the way perhaps the building is treated in building elements and facade. Because right now it seems very intellectually rigorous in the way you've presented these neighborhoods, but it's missing some of the texture of that living room that you showed us. And I think both are quite endearing, but I think there's an opportunity to find out where you blur the distinction between public realm, landscape, and building base. And so I'm going to leave it there, but just to say that would be my wish that you might come back with some thoughts on that.
Thanks, Kirk. Catherine?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you call on me?
Yes, your hand
Sorry.
is raised.
Thank you. I agree with all my colleagues. Great presentation. So thank you for that. And I do want to double down on Commissioner McYoung around the design and the elements incorporation of culture, right? Given that this is the Pardee building and representing global studies, what is missing, although it's articulated from this living room perspective, but when you're talking about the cultural integration of how that shows up in the building, both externally and internally, that's what's missing to wrap around the full story of the importance of this building. The second thing I want to lift up, while the design is amazing, I'm seeing a lot of stairs, and I am deeply concerned about in terms of students and faculty and other folks visiting the space. It doesn't feel as welcoming to the disability community when there's the impression of a lot of stairs. Granted, there's an elevator, but from all of the renderings, there's a certain of implied ableism here that I just want you to be mindful of, given what is housed in this building, and just to consider that in the design and how this can truly be welcoming to all, and not just the representation of all these stairs, because it can throw off folks who are trying to come to this building and experiencing it, full stop.
Thank you, Catherine. David Manfredi?
I don't want to repeat a lot of very good comments. This really, we should applaud both the design team and Boston University. So there's so many good big decisions here about the opportunity to do something very special, but as somebody said, to reclaim all of those blacktop parking spaces and create this really important green space that is going to be so important, so precious to everybody on this campus, and make those connections. I'm very interested in and maybe more out of interest and curiosity than as to offer a critical opinion, but to really understand how what's happening inside in terms of the organization. And I love the storyline of these living rooms and in these wonderful houses, and how that's been mapped on the building, and how you're thinking about that. I have a sense of all that, but I think more explanation would be very helpful. And it's the points that Mick Young and Kirk just made are excellent as well. The connectivity between what's happening on the ground plane and what's happening in this building is strong, maybe can be even stronger. So thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you, David. I'm not seeing any other commissioners' comments, so I can summarize at the end, but I do want to just ask that when you come back to subcommittee, we get a little bit more feedback on the drop-off area. I'm not sure what's happening as it relates to the entry plaza. So I think that goes in tandem with drawings that Shauna may have been asking for more specificity, more details, and maybe plan blow-ups of what's happening there on the ground floor. But I will say this is a very exciting project. These are the kinds of projects that we like to see come to the BCDC. So we're really excited to work with you. And maybe we'll see if there's any public testimony, and I'll try to summarize at the end.
Great. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the *9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function, and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Dolores, we've promoted you to co-host. Are you able to unmute yourself?
I am, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dolores Bogdanian. I currently serve as president of the Audubon Circle Neighborhood Association, which association is a member of the Boston University Community Task Force. I'm here to speak on the potential impact of this project on the public realm, and in particular the Esplanade and the Bay State Road Back Bay West Architectural Conservation District. This site is mere steps away from the Conservation District. And of course, this building will probably cast shadow on the Esplanade. And neither one of those points was raised during the course of this presentation. I think that the BPDA has done a very inadequate job protecting our open space lands, especially from encroachment of shadow. And while it's laudable of the university to try and create some open space on its campus, it's private open space that can be converted to other uses at any time in the future. And it may very well be to the detriment of our public open space, and especially something so precious as our Esplanade, our historic parkland along the Charles River. We don't know what the shadow impacts of this project will be. And I think that's something that should have been presented to the commission during the course of this presentation. I think it is ironic and a little disingenuous of the university to espouse such eloquence about creating private open space, but that could have detrimental impact on historic public open space land and an historic district, meaning the Back Bay architectural district. And I don't see any reference at all to the architectural district or to the Esplanade, and mention of BU's beach kind of is irrelevant. So thank you, and I would ask that the commission take a closer look at how this project impacts our public open space and historic resources in the city of Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolores.
And Christina, if I could maybe just address that specific public comment for commissioners' benefit. So as part of the IMP, the project zoning, basically the zoning envelope for this was studied, proposed, and ultimately approved, which did also include shadow studies of the impact of a mass on this site at this height and location. And so we'll ask the proponent to bring that to the next subcommittee so that that can be presented and discussed.
Thank you, Seth. That was my question, actually, so that was great.
Pam, we've promoted you to co-host. Are you able to unmute yourself?
I believe so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Good evening and good evening, commissioners. My name is Pam Beal, and I am the chair of the Boston University Community Task Force, and I'm also a commissioner on the Bay State Road Back Bay West Architectural Commission. And I am here to tell you that the project and the landscape of this entire area and how it incorporated into the taller buildings on Commonwealth Avenue and the low-rise buildings and historic buildings along Bay State Road was vetted through the task force meeting, and this building was very well received, as was all the landscaping. So I look forward to a very positive public process, and I feel that this building will be a great addition in a wonderful location in the middle of the campus, and that it will tie all of this area of the campus together and really make it a cohesive, important piece of a very long linear campus. So thank you for your time this evening, and I look forward in listening to the further deliberations and hopefully participating when needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam. Anne Marie, I see your hand raised. I'm just going to reiterate, are there any additional members of the public who wish to contribute public testimony? Okay, seeing no new hands raised, we're going to close the public testimony. We would invite anybody wishing to provide additional commentary to do so. I'm happy to put the BCDC comment inbox here in the chat. So commissioners, at this time, I'm going to close the public testimony period and turn this back over to you, Mimi, for further facilitation.
Yeah, Anne Marie has her hand raised, so love to hear what she has to offer.
Thank you. I just, first of all, really appreciate the design, also appreciate the public commentary. The one thing I would add is there's much I like about the proposed design. I am curious, or as we review this and continue to discuss it in subcommittee, would like to understand the relationship between this building and the broader campus identity, which is obviously evolving. As Mick Young, acknowledged, there has been, an evolution. There's some exciting new design. I actually can begin to see how the tower itself begins to relate to, say, the data center, but it's not as clear to me how the base of the building, which of course is such an important role in the public realm, relates to the broader context, physical context of the campus and the neighborhood. So I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about that in our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. So I'm going to add on to that comment some additional ones that we heard. We talked a little bit about materiality. Could this building reflect the diversity that is defined by global studies? I think that was a theme that we heard a couple of times. When you come to subcommittee, we would like to see drawings that further describe the landscape. It could be, plans or more detailed blow-ups, but I think the renderings have served their purpose to get the ideas across, but now I think we want a little bit more technical drawings around topography and streetscapes. I think would be helpful. There was some talk about the living rooms that are nicely reflected in the building. Can that story, and I can see that there's a thread is developed in the landscape, but how can that be a little bit more reinforced? We'd love to have a conversation about that. The legibility of the program and, incorporation of culture was brought up. I like that is something that I think really could define and make this building very distinct. Accessibility was talked about at 2 scales. Accessibility to the building. Looks like currently there's only an accessible route through a building. And so are there other ways around that? And then accessibility within the building. Are we losing sight of people with access issues? And then we talked about shadows, and appreciate that that study will come back so we can talk about how shadows and height was approved during the IMP to remind us all. So I think that that's all I have. We didn't specifically talk about the glass, what you intend for the glass on the exterior of the tower. So it would be nice to know in subcommittee what you have. It seemed like there's some kind of film, and we do want to weigh in visibility from the inside out as an as something we like to see in buildings. So that would be nice to know what you have planned for that. I think that's all we have. And so we're excited to see you in subcommittee. All right. So with that, I'm going to move it along, Christina. I think we're going to go now to informational presentations.
Do we need to take a vote to send to subcommittee?
Yes, we do. Thank you for reminding me.
That's okay.
All right. So I need a motion.
I move to send the project to subcommittee.
Second.
All right. I'm going to call on everyone. Shauna Gillis-Smith.
Yeah. Yes.
We lost David Hassine to another meeting. Mick Young.
Yes.
Anne-Marie Lubnow.
Yes.
David Manfredi.
Yes.
Catherine Morris.
Yes.
I'm going to call on our recused commissioners. Bill Ron.
I'm coming to the back end of the meeting. Yes.
Oh, we'll call it
Can
recused.
you hear me?
But yes, we can, Bill. Laura Solano.
Recused.
Kirk Sykes.
Yes.
And myself, yes. So we look forward to seeing you in subcommittee.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to shift gears from new projects to informational presentations, starting with Warren Towers. We're going to continue with BU. I will just remind the commission that this is coming to us as an update. It's really not up for deliberation, so we don't have to offer comments unless you have burning recommendations as the team wraps up their CDs. But we do want to show you where the project has really evolved from all of the comments by this commission.
And I don't have the exact language in front of me, but the specific proviso was an update on the evolution of the ground floor design based on comments from commissioners and where the city also wanted to take the project, but was not yet ready at the time of approval.
So Christina, is it just up for the proponent to give us a presentation, or do we have a preamble?
No, I think Laura and other members of the proponent team, if you'd like to, the preamble you gave Mimi was great. So you guys can take it away.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Christina, and thanks, commissioners. I'm Laura Rushfelt, Senior Project Manager with CBT, and we, along with MDS, have been advancing the project. Just a reminder, when we came before BCDC in spring 2024 as part of the joint IMP PNF review and subsequent approval, the project at that time had limited the ground floor interventions to sidewalk improvements and accessibility upgrades, and the commission approved the project with requests for the project team to revisit ground floor improvements, including rethinking the existing building canopy, maximizing transparency and activation on the streetscape, and just considering the building as an integrated whole in terms of its design language. So the team took this to heart and went back to revisit the ground plane, starting with the materiality and the color palette that was developed for the tower renovation, and reviewing the opportunities and constraints of the ground plane. This is an existing building, so we have to work within this context, particularly with large, wide shear walls that comprise the backup of the facade at each tower base, and finding a way within this framework to develop a ground floor expression that maximizes openness, creates seamlessness along the length of the facade, and finds a way to start to stitch the tower and podium together. The revised streetscape design maximizes the transparency at these retail facades and deploys a textured metal facade in a pretty playful and dynamic way to try to animate these more solid portions of the facade. The facade rhythm seeks to reflect the existing podium's proportions and rhythms, and ties the tower to the podium at these punctuated moments within each tower. Here you can see a before image and then an after image that's demonstrating this change. The new canopy and the continuous frames of the facade create an armature that tie the open and solid facades together. And the existing 12 media screens that exist on the building have been replaced in kind with a more architecturally integrated solution, which was a direct comment from the commission here. There's subtle shifts along the length of this canopy to create dynamism and difference as a visitor moves along the length of the facade. And a new special canopy, which is grander in scale and has a more accented texture, which gives hierarchy to the main building entry where no canopy exists today. The result along the length of Commonwealth Ave is an opened, activated ground floor solution that really starts to feel more integrated with the towers. And where the old canopy and retail entries faced frontally only, the new streetscape design will wrap the building at each corner, providing continuous weather protection, activation at the grade as the building is approached on end along the length of Commonwealth Avenue, and daylighting retail spaces and bike parking programs that wrap around on either end of the building. Finally, you see the detailing at the podium parapet, fourth floor windows, and even penthouse have all been refined, working with the Boston Planning Department staff input. And we feel like this updated design feels more unified, integrates the design language really from the streetscape all the way to the skyline. And that is the update. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Commissioners, any feedback? If not, I'll just say that I think all of the comments that the commission gave have definitely advanced the design, and I think it's a welcome change to the existing condition. But I do see that Kirk has his hand raised. And you're on mute, Kirk.
Two in a row. Thank you for doing this. I think it's such an important stretch of ComAv that needs animation, and I think your intent is clear here to try and achieve that. Just a couple of questions and maybe comments. One, it is a little relentless at one elevation, and I just wonder if even at the tower there isn't an opportunity to raise the canopy or alter the canopy in some way that it's a little more dynamic, along the length of the T, of course. And then the question about lighting, which I'm sure you've thought about because it's a great opportunity to introduce new lighting strategies here. So, and then the last comment is I'm assuming the canopy varies in its density or opacity. So even that could be a more dynamic experience as you're walking under it. So just a few questions or thoughts.
Laura, you are muted.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to briefly address the questions?
That would be fine, Laura.
Yeah.
So we did study options that looked at a canopy that maybe changed in level more or had some higher levels of differentiation. And we found just along the very long length of the facade, it actually contributed to a busyness. So we sought to strike a balance here with something that did have subtle dynamism and difference along its length, but didn't introduce too many moving parts. So the way that the canopy extends a bit further at the retail spaces. So as you read it on end, you read actually the canopy is taller at the retail spaces, helping with that sight line into those openings. And also looking at subtle differences like adding a texture that picks up on the solid facade along the portions of the canopy that are at the solid areas, but then letting it open up so you experience change in daylight and shadow effects differently as you move along the length of the canopy. We also varied the lighting. So what you see at the A type at the retail spaces, the lighting actually is continuous along the prow of the canopy and then switch and follows the piers when you get to the solid moments. So you have a differentiation there. And then at the main entry canopy, we actually have a rippled surface here and feature lighting that uplights that will actually create a cool light wash on that surface to really accentuate that. So it tries to create these different moments along the length without unnecessarily adding a lot on a building that has a lot going on already.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other commissioners. Hands raised.
Mimi, I just want to make a quick point here, which is that I just really want to commend the BU team for coming back to us with some of these details. You know, this was, again, I think, you know, as we've been talking to the commission about some of these reforms, this is a great example of staff being able to continue to work with proponents to address comments shared by the commission. I really want to highlight that and BU's partnership in helping us address some of the concerns that the commission had raised before.
Thank you, Diana. Catherine Morris, I see your hand up.
Yes, I just have a logistical question around this new change. Is, you know, given we're New England and we have very unique weather, and I'm thinking about weather conditions, whether it's snow, icicles, and that falling on this particular new design, you know, have all those factors been considered given that this is now a glass canopy versus a fabric one, from a design perspective, and what that could potentially mean around changing weather conditions?
It's a good question, and we did get pressed by Seth and the BPDA team, sorry, Boston Planning Department team about that as well. We were asked to study it to be sure we wouldn't be attaching gutters to the outside, that it could handle snow loads. A unique thing about it is that the old canopy actually just dumped rain onto the public passway, you know, straight onto the sidewalk. So we'll actually now be capturing that and dealing with it internal to the building. And we did look at how to structure the canopy such that it can withstand the loading that would come from capturing and dealing with the weather elements that fall onto it without having to dispel into the public way. We are still working out some of the logistics of those details as we advance this part of the project to catch up with the rest of the project, which is preparing to begin construction.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we wish you the best in wrapping up the CDs and look forward to seeing this in construction very soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, commissioners.
I think with that, we're having a follow-up conversation to the Article 80 modernization and the reform to the BCDC. And I'm going to pass this on to Christina.
Thanks, Mimi. I thought we would just make a little bit of extra time. I think we had a very long monthly meeting last month for most commissioners, I think almost everyone here except for Mimi, where we introduced 6 specific formal recommendations to the commission on reforms that were related to our broader reform efforts from our Article 80 modernization. That was to remind everyone just to improve the consistency of reviewers, thoughts around reforming public testimony, initiating the commission's review earlier, reaffirming the commission's advisory role, introducing meeting limits, and increasing the threshold for the commission's review. And one, we wanted to say thank you for everybody who contributed comments last month, and who maybe sent us follow-up comments or calls, shared their thoughts with us. We also wanted to let you know that we met with the BSA and the BSLA to take in additional feedback. And we just wanted to share with you that we're still working through that. I think specifically the recommendations around introducing meeting limits and increasing the threshold for the commission's review. I think we spent some time talking about the need for more clarity around what actually describes a project of special significance. We look forward to bringing that language back to this commission, but frankly, we're sort of working it through the channels of our council and our senior leadership team, and are not quite ready to share that this evening. But wanted to, I thought since the agenda was lighter, although we are already 4 minutes over time, leave a little bit of space if there was anybody who had any questions or comments that they weren't able to share previously that would like to do so. If not, I also have two completely separate updates to discuss. Okay, well, we will commit to being back again in front of you soon with some more updates around those two specific things. But one, just a quick reminder that we have two subcommittee sessions scheduled this month, the April 15th and April 22nd, and that's not an April Fool's joke. We appreciate your time. And the other is that we are in the early stages of planning our annual thank you event. We had to delay this earlier this year. The mayor was out on parental leave. Then we had the state of the city. We're looking at some dates in early May, so please keep an eye on your calendar or your inbox, sorry, as we send around some draft dates. But looking forward to getting everybody together to say thank you for another excellent year, although now we're deep into 2025 at this point. Diana, is there anything I maybe missed there?
I think that's great. I think our goal is to host it at the Parkman House as we have in the past, have an opportunity to reflect as a commission. So really excited to host that event, and please let us know in your calendar. We just want to get these things locked in and booked so that we can get this on the mayor's calendar and hope she can attend.
So, all right, that's what we had for you this evening. Oh, go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
So Diana, you say you're looking for us to share dates, or you're going to share dates that then we will discuss?
We're sharing dates. So Christina's going to follow up with a couple of options, and based on commissioner attendance, we will pick the date that has the most attendees and try to get that on the mayor's roster of events.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood something.
Not to jump back into the BCDC reform, I also know that we're hoping to do a training session. I don't know if there's a time frame that we're trying to aim for. There's a month. That would be helpful to also know if that's, I think as people's summer schedules start to get in the way, it'd be nice to know when we're targeting that.
Yes, and I think, Mimi, next month, we hope to be back to you guys with an update on the Article 28 and Article 80 modernization, and specifically the timing of when we would want to advance these elements through zoning, through the BPDA board, and subsequently, once that's been implemented, when we host our sort of, operations and training. So more details. We're working through all those pieces right now and the sequence for implementing those changes.
So zoning changes have to happen before we have these sessions, so that we're not talking about super near future.
Hopefully the training session would happen before the zoning, but I would say that that is not, we should not plan for a training session before May at this point. We're targeting a zoning change potentially this summer. And so I think that gives us a couple months of runway to get a training session done before that happens.
Terrific.
Although many of the changes are not related to zoning, they're primarily operational in nature. In fact, almost all of them are.
Exactly. So I think this is, Mimi, I think a little bit more about, we want to make sure we are all in alignment with the direction we're going on these things, because we don't want to set up a training session and not have alignment with the commission on where we're going. So we want to lock that in and then get going on getting that on our calendars.
Makes sense. All right. I think with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved.
A second? Yeah, I heard second, so I'm just going to assume. So Shauna,
Yes.
Kirk Sykes,
Yes.
Mick Young Kim, David Manfredi,
Yes.
Bill Ron,
Yes.
Anne Marie,
Yes.
Laura Solano,
Yes.
Catherine Morris,
Yes.
and me, Mimi Love, yes. So we are adjourned. Thank you all. I'm glad we didn't have a late night because we have a busy April. And see you in subcommittee.
Thank you.
Good night,
All
everyone.
right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.